Okay, it looks like we're about 100 and almost 150 people logged in so far. So great turnout. Clearly, this is a topic that everyone is concerned about, focused on, and wanting to make sure we get right in the city. And so um, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm looking at the nods of the fellow panelists. It looks like we're good. Uh, it looks like we'll have a few others joining us, but for the sake of time, I'll just begin. Good evening, everybody. My name is Loren Taylor. In case, for anybody who hasn't met me, I'm your council member representing District 6 in Oakland City Hall. And this evening is about public safety here in Oakland, not just District 6, but across the city. But clearly this is a sort of anchored here in District 6. And I'll just begin with a little bit of level setting. We're not going to cover every aspect of public safety in tonight's meeting. There's a lot to cover and touch on, but we did want to just hit those things that are most important, higher priority topics that are timely right now. And so to that end, I'm grateful that we've got an incredible host of panelists to join me to share their thoughts, their perspectives, things that are currently happening to help keep us safer here in Oakland, but then also to be honest relative to what we're working through in order to maintain public safety here. Ground rules. I guess want to start with just emphasizing that we are very focused as we address this challenging, difficult, complex topic. We want to maintain respect for each other through this process. And so no hate speech. We want to really acknowledge that that we've all got lived experiences and realities that help us to define what makes us safe, how we move forward. And that's the beauty and the challenge of being in a city where, 400 and, about 440,000 residents come together to define the solutions that work for all of us. One thing, another ground rule, just to let everybody know, we are recording the meeting. And so just so that we're all on notice. And just, I think you may have noticed, some may have noticed that we will maintain attendees on mute, given the fact that we expect to have over 200, 250 attendees just for maintaining the environment. But we will, when we get to the Q&A section, look for hands that are raised in order to unmute and give folks a chance to speak. We also have a number of questions that were submitted in advance, and so we will be sure that we touch on those. So one thing I wanted to do in opening up is kind of acknowledge my role. In addition to being the council member for the district, I'm also a husband, a father. I'm raising 2 young kids here in District 6 in the city of Oakland. As a Black man growing up here in Oakland, I've been a victim of street violence. I've been a victim of biased policing. I've been racially profiled. I share concerns similar to many of you in terms of how our public safety system, it doesn't work well for everybody. It doesn't solve all of our problems. I think anybody I ask on this call will acknowledge that it can be better, it can be improved, and that's why we're here, to figure out how we can actually do that, make sure that the system works for all of us, so that we don't feel as though we have to take things on our own in order to keep ourselves safe. That manifests itself different in different communities. Some of us feel as though, hey, we've got to go hire private security. Others may say, well, hey, to stay safe, I may need to move out of the city. And others may say, to stay safe, I actually need to have a gun. We're trying to get to the point where we are not exacerbating the pain, the trauma that is felt, but we're able to support each other through the system and through our partnership together. And so that's why we're here. That's why I'm grateful for the partnership of the panelists we have. We've got, I will give them a chance to introduce themselves when when it's their turn to kind of speak and provide some intro remarks. But we do have our City of Oakland Police Chief, Leronne Armstrong, appreciative for his partnership, his grounded sort of community leadership as an Oakland native, more than 20 years with OPD and experience in law enforcement long before that. He'll be able to give more detail on his background, his vision as a new police chief for our city. I'm excited to have him here. I'm also excited to have our chief of the Department of Violence Prevention. We all know that in order to address the challenges that we see, there's response to crises and crime and when things are happening, and then there's the preventive side. Prevention being that much more sort of long-term, sustainable, effective, but isn't necessarily the immediate response that we need. And so grateful for the Department of Violence Prevention that has been stood up and for Chief Cespedes' leadership. One piece with respect to really improving our public safety system is strengthening the trust in our safety network, trust in police, because that goes a long way to allowing the whole system to work better. And so one piece within our city that ensures that trusted relationship is our police commission, which exists to help strengthen how our police department goes about constitutional policing. And so I'm grateful to have Miss Regina Jackson, the chair of our Oakland Police Commission, here as well. And then many of you know that we have embarked on a very bold journey within the city to reimagine what public safety could and should be, recognizing that police are not the only tool to keep us safe, but one of many tools out there. And so as we go about reimagining, we have a task force of community representatives who are gathering the information, trying to represent the voice of the community and really dig into the details to make sure that we can articulate a path of where we want to go, how we might get there, and have that served up to the council, the city council, in that for recommendations that could be adopted. And so we've got two task force members for our Reimagining Public Safety Task Force. First is the District 6 representative, Keisha Henderson. Grateful for Keisha being willing to step up and really hold all of the task force and those involved honest to representing those things that are most critical and relevant to District 6 based on her lived experience and her partnership. And similarly, we've got John Jones III, an Oakland native community activist, advocate for a long time, deeply connected to many different communities across our city, and grateful for his voice that's on the council as well, making sure that we, on the task force as well, making sure that we get it right. And so wanted to introduce them. My team was gonna let me know if we have others in the room. It looks like we've got a couple of my colleagues, Councilmember Treva Reed, want to acknowledge her. And I'm assuming that we will have others. We saw others RSVP, but grateful for the council members, my colleagues who are similarly committed to making sure we get right within our city. So that's as far as initial opening remarks. I do want to just lay the foundation and acknowledge that we have a number of challenges that we are up against here in our city. This is not intended to be a town hall where we're sugarcoating the reality or trying to make it seem as though everything's perfect. We have some challenges that begin with the systems of oppression that really underlie our police system, but go on to address the fact that we are really scarce relative to our resources. We are struggling with a $62 million budget deficit within our city. And it's because of COVID. And let's talk about COVID. I know, folks, we don't want to use COVID as an excuse, but there are some realities that the virus has created and the response to it in terms of the sheltering in place, the loss of jobs and economic income and opportunities. There are realities. We haven't been able to have those touch points that have helped people to have a sense of belonging and have alternatives to how they engage, alternative paths. And so want to acknowledge those realities as we move forward, but also acknowledge that we are here, we are committed. I know my fellow panelists are committed, and then I know many of you on the line are similarly focused on how we do navigate the challenges that we have in order to get to where we all agree we need to be, a safer community, a more empowering community that and system that helps to lift folks out of where they are to greater opportunities and being able to thrive. And so with that, I want to turn it over and begin with our police chief, give him an opportunity to share a little intro of himself, also share some of the challenges and realities that we're facing. Similarly, I think it's important to acknowledge for our chief to acknowledge how the police are a part of a system that is collaborating, an ecosystem, and some of those collaborative partnerships that are there as well. And then I know that we have some overarching questions that are out there, and they include aspects of sideshows, which have become a much bigger thing. We've got questions related to our rise in gun violence that has occurred, and also the increase in robberies in certain communities. And so I want to, with that framing, give our police chief an opportunity to introduce himself, share some remarks. And actually, I'm going to do one thing because this is my first time using the polling feature. I want to give folks a chance to say where they are coming from. So we've got a poll in progress. If you could share what your zip code is, where you're coming from, in terms of, so we can just get a poll for who's in the room, who's the audience here. As Chief Armstrong unmutes himself and begins.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thanks, Council Member, for putting together this town hall and inviting me to participate. Obviously, public safety is something that's near and dear to me. So I must say that, for those that don't know me, I'm Leronne Armstrong, the new Chief of Police for the Oakland Police Department. I was sworn in as the Chief of Police on February 8th, 2021. So I've been on the job about 2 weeks, but I'm not new to the job. I'm born and raised in the city of Oakland. I was born and raised in West Oakland, graduated from McClymonds High School, and I've served on the Oakland Police Department for the last 22 years in multiple capacities, and I've spent the last 4 years as the Deputy Chief of Police for East Oakland. First of all, I have to say that it's truly an honor for me to be the Chief of Police in Oakland. It's really, for me, a lifelong dream, a lot of hard work and dedication to my community, and a true opportunity to be a part of change, to grow a police department, to improve trust in our community, to reduce crime in our community, particularly violent crime, and then to hold this department accountable, to begin to make steps forward to help us, come into compliance with the negotiated settlement agreement. I'm acutely aware of the issues and the challenges that I face. Also, the challenges that we see currently in our community. Our rise in violence is truly unacceptable. We've seen a year in 2020 like we haven't seen in the last 6 or 7 years, where we experienced declines in violent crime. In 2020, amidst the pandemic, obviously we faced tremendous challenges. The inability to utilize our ceasefire strategy like we had done over many years really hampered our ability to address and respond to violent crime. The traditional way in which we communicate with those at the highest risk was something that we were unable to do because of restrictions. So as we, in my tenure, the last 2 weeks, me coming into place, I've instituted a new crime strategy that is really focused on being nimble, being able to move quicker and drive resources towards violent crime. But oftentimes when, these new transitions in leadership and new structural responses to crime change, sometimes community doesn't feel the impact immediately. And now when we're talking about shootings and homicides, we're talking about people, talking about people's lives. We're talking about public safety. And so I know the trauma that our community has experienced as a result of this violent crime. And we're working closely with the Department of Violence Prevention to provide more services and resources. I'm also aware of our sideshow activity. I happened to be out last night while we had 2 homicides in East Oakland. We also had sideshow activity that hampered our city for over 10 hours yesterday. We have tremendous budget restrictions because of COVID that has taken away our ability to deploy officers specifically to address our sideshow activity. So we are hampered by the lack of resources. And with that being said, we've seen our crowds grow to the sizes of 200 spectators and another 300 vehicles. And I completely understand the impact that it is having on our residents of East Oakland in particular. As I stood out there in our community last night, I heard over 100 rounds being fired, from rifles to handguns, all in our community last night. I made some decisions last night to reallocate some of our resources that were on the streets because it was just difficult to listen to. And so I can't imagine what it's like for our community members that have to deal with this on an ongoing basis. I'm a resident of East Oakland, and I also hear the gunfire and I see the activity. And so this is one of my primary focuses is reducing violent crime, reducing crime in our community. Oakland deserves to be a safe city, but it takes resources to be able to do that. This idea that we can police the city with fewer cops than any other city this size in America is just really challenging based on the level of violence that we're experiencing and that we see every day in our community. So as we continue to try to utilize the resources in the most effective way we can, we still will face tremendous challenges. And that's why the partnerships that have been talked about are so important. Because if there isn't going to be heavy investment in law enforcement resources, we need support from other parts of our city. And that includes community. It really includes the partnership with community and community-based organizations to help support both prevention and intervention of those involved in violence. And so as I close, I just say to you that this is the beginning. It's only been 2 weeks for me on the job, sitting in the seat as the chief of police. I've already begun to make sweeping changes within the organization to make it more accountable, to try to drive down crime in all of our communities. I've put liaison in our English speaking community so that they can be more responsive and have an opportunity to communicate with our officers in a way they haven't in the past. Hopefully that brings forth confidence and trust in our police department that we are there to support those communities that traditionally don't like calling law enforcement or don't feel like they have the ability to communicate with law enforcement. We continue to provide a presence in all areas of the city. I'm committed to reducing violence across our city, but I won't be able to do it alone. And so I just really reach out to everybody to say that this is not a time to criticize one another or point fingers at any particular person. I think for us, it really is about what kind of support can we all come together and provide one another to address this problem that's having a huge impact on all of our community, particularly people of color. I've experienced it myself, losing a family member of my own in January. So I know how important this is. I know how it can impact families, and I understand the trauma that it leaves in the community when you have consistent shootings and homicides. And so I just say, as I start this tenure, that I'm committed. I am on the streets every time someone is killed in our city. I am there, no matter what time it is. I get out and come to the scene because that's how important it is to me. And so this is something that I truly have a passion for. This is my home. This is my city. And so I'm honored to lead this police department, but I'm honored to also stand next to those that are willing to help me address violence. So out in there, council member, thank you.
Thank you for that, Chief. And as I've said to you, but I'll say it publicly, I am excited to have you on board, appreciative for your leadership, and committed to helping you be successful, because your success is our success as a city. And thank you for that. For the sake of time, we're going to move next to our police commission, the chair of our police commission, Miss Regina Jackson. And as I said earlier, part of the equation, this ecosystem that we have, is that we want to ensure that we are restoring the trust and that partnership with law enforcement, and the Police Commission plays a vital role in that as we help to improve overall public safety. So, Ms. Jackson, please.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name is Regina Jackson. I'm the chair of the Police Commission and was installed when the Police Commission was first seated. I am in my 4th year of the term. I want to say that the Police Commission was installed with your support based upon the decades of the lack of accountability coming out of the Oakland Police Department. As we know, we are in our 18th year of a negotiated settlement agreement. And while we have confidence that Chief Armstrong will help us get out of it, we are in place to support through policy, through protocols, and quite frankly, through engagement to help Chief Armstrong make sure that the accountabilities that are necessary are in fact part of the protocols and policies that can support him if he needs to terminate anybody for having violated these. We have 7 really committed folks that are on the commission. I see my vice chair, Jose Dorado, in the audience, and I've just lost some of my lighting, so my apologies. I have a puppy, new puppy, that's only about 2 months old, who just stepped on it. Anyway, we have done some exceptional protocols around policies for use of force, for felons and probation, the carotid hold, and certainly a series of them around armed and unresponsive policies, which are now including the Bearcat. I say all this to say that we have only really begun to take a look at the hardcore policies that in most instances are 15 and 20 years old. And so our responsibility is to get those updated so that the police can enforce that when their officers violate. I will say that I have all confidence in Chief Armstrong in turning around a much maligned Oakland Police Department, one with still some toxic undertones. And we must rid every person that does not believe that their primary responsibility is to protect and serve. Having said that, I believe that, you know, if you ever have questions of the commission, you should attend our meetings, you should write in with your questions, and, you know, hopefully we will be able to either resolve your issue or get more information which may educate you more about the challenges that we face. Because quite frankly, we face many more challenges than we have creative solutions. But by having those challenges, we are getting more creative. So having said that, I am a 53 or 4-year-old resident of Oakland, proud to be here. And to Councilmember Taylor's point, we deserve to be free. We deserve to be safe. But it's not just OPD's challenge, it's all of ours. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Jackson. I don't know how, I don't recall if you mentioned it, but Chair Jackson has been leading an incredible institution, the East Oakland Youth Development Center, which is an anchor in our city in terms of helping our young people reach their fullest potential. And when we talk about solutions that ensure that our communities stay safe, it's institutions like EOYDC and the investment that they're making in our young people that is a big part of that. So thank you for what you do.
That's my day job. My night job and in between job is the commission work.
There you go. There you go.
Thank you.
We didn't want that to go unacknowledged.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
For sure, for sure. And so when we talk about this set of partnerships that allows us to extend our capability in terms of keeping our community safe, I next want to bring up Chief Cespedes for some brief remarks that really, what is the Department of Violence Prevention and its role in this overall ecosystem? maybe share a couple successes so that people can actually crystallize what that means and looks like. And then also what is needed to support the Department of Violence Prevention actually doing more and increasing its impact as we move forward. So Chief Cespedes. If you're there, are you there, Chief?
Thank you, Councilmember. All the panelists. Are we here? Okay.
Yes.
Honored to be here. Just really quickly, my name is Guillermo Cespedes. I am by training a social worker and worked in Oakland for 20 years, 81 and 2000. Have two children. My daughter was born and raised here. She still lives here. And then went to LA and developed while I was in Oakland, worked directly with families in the Flatlands, in the Fruitvale district, and did a tremendous amount of work with youth, using music and ancestry and cultural traditions to sort of strengthen youth identity. Went to LA, and also my work then shifted to working with those already involved with group or gang activity. The work that we developed there then got transferred to some of the most violent countries in Central America, the Eastern Caribbean, and North Africa. And so I went abroad to implement that. And then in September of '99, I was very honored to come back to Oakland to contribute to the work that is being done here. Department of Violence Prevention is really young. While I came to Oakland in September of 2019, the department didn't become fully operational until July of 2020. And it became fully operational by absorbing or inheriting the Oakland Unite portfolio of contracts and funding and staff. So my team is comprised of 17 people. 5 of those, including 5 and I, 6 of us, that go directly into the community to do direct work. And the rest, they work with a large network of CBOs across the city, 21 of them. And so the Department of Violence Prevention is a network of CBOs and a very small group of committed city employees that do direct practice 24/7. You asked earlier, what can you expect of the Department of Violence Prevention? First of all, I think we have 2 missions. I mean, we have 5 results that we have to deliver on behalf of the city, where one of them is to reduce gun violence, reduce intimate partner violence, reduce sex trafficking, reduce the number of cold cases, which we have to work very closely with law enforcement on that, and reduce sex trafficking. It's a huge canvas or huge emphasis that we have. What can we expect? Basically, we will be dividing the work into 2 areas. One, what I like to commonly refer to as fireproofing. And this is all the prevention work that we think needs to be done in order to reduce trauma well enough for communities to get mobilized. What does that mean? Anytime there's a homicide in the city of Oakland, we need to respond to that family. We had 102 homicides in 2020. That means 102 families. They were traumatized by the event, that the trauma will live much longer than the investigation, and that trauma will be triggered every time there is another shooting. So a lot of work that we end up doing has to do with that support, that embracing families immediately after the event, and really walking families through all of the systems and all of the processes that we can negotiate in order for a family to get through the trauma. So that's fireproofing. That's long-term work. On the other hand, we also have to do what I think is a nearly very difficult work, which is to interrupt violence using non-law enforcement methods. What that means is talking to people that have the credibility to talk with the people, to engage the folks that can, in fact, negotiate even temporarily, stand down or a ceasefire, if you will. And that's more difficult work to do because it really requires knowing neighborhoods very, very, very well. So in terms of successes, I don't know that, I want to brag too much about, or I want to highlight too much. We're working very hard, first of all, and we are facing probably the most difficult time that I remember in my professional career, which is the overlap of violence, the public health issue of the pandemic, intimate partner violence, gun violence, unemployment, all of the things that we have discussed previously. Given that, most of our work, I would say in the last, at least since I've been in Oakland, and certainly since March of 2020 rather, has been really responding to the traumatic effects of homicides, specifically with African-American families, which creates a situation in which literally families are afraid to come out of the house. So what are those successes? Some of it is helping families navigate the system, and some of it is really literally working with mothers that have the ability to get youngsters in the neighborhood to stand down, or people in the neighborhood to stand down and stop the shooting. Sometimes we're able to stop the shooting periodically, as has been the case in some neighborhoods, and sometimes we're able to get people to just stand down altogether. So the Department of Violence Prevention, what you can expect from the department is we will respond. Chief Armstrong talked about responding to every homicide. The Department of Violence Prevention is about to bring on a couple of extra people to do that along with law enforcement. And the other thing that you can expect from us is that we will be honest about things that are working, things that are not working, and when we need to change courses. Just in closing, I would like to say that as a way of changing courses, we are having a very robust community engagement strategy which starts next week. It goes for 6 weeks. This has been mandated by council to inform how we move forward. So we will, we're getting the word out about that. We would like people to come out and be our advisors and really have the community tell us what their thinking is as we move forward. I don't think we're going back to an old normal. I think we have to think of new strategies moving forward. And I'm very honored to be a part of this process in Oakland that is really leading the country in reimagining how we reshape law enforcement, public safety rather, in a responsible and thoughtful manner. Thank you, Councilmember Taylor, for inviting me, for your work on the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force. And I look forward to continuing to serve the city.
Thank you for that, Chief. And I appreciate the level of not just experience, but evidence-based application that you're bringing to this role.
Thank you.
Absolutely. The aspect of fireproofing, if a match is lit, we want to make sure that that match doesn't catch fire and take everything else with it. Absolutely critical, in addition to the fire extinguishing that we know is necessary when we do have that crisis and that emergency. And one of the things that I am kind of excited about is how you're making sure and that with that fireproofing and that installation that's needed, that we are not just taking the traditional approach, but starting to look at the families, the moms and the grandmothers, and working with them to create that influence.
Absolutely. We cannot build community without strengthening whatever structures are there. They may not look like the structures we have in our heads, but those are vital resources that we need to develop a partnership with. Not to blame them for their kids' faults, but to literally develop a strong partnership so that the team is stronger.
Absolutely, because if we're helping folks to change their choices, their life choices, who are they going to listen to? Some stranger from outside or someone that's part of their internal network and structure? that we're able to work with. So thank you for that. On the topic of fire extinguishing, we know that we have police is one tool for extinguishing these fires when they get out of control. But in our Reimagining Safety Task Force, we know that we are looking to extend what can be done with alternatives to police response and other solutions. And so to that, I'd like to turn it over to Keisha Henderson, who is our District 6 representative on the Reimagining Safety Task Force. Keisha, in addition to an introduction, hoping that you'll be able to describe why it's important for you, it was important for you to be on the task force, what you're hoping to get out of the task force, and sort of some additional on the ground sort of insight relative to public safety, the nuances that we're balancing, and how the reimagining safety process is going. And I think you're a co-host now, so you should be able to speak. Keisha, you there? Not sure what's going on.
Experiencing some technical difficulties.
Okay. Well, John Jones then, we'll turn it over to John Jones III. And John is similarly on the Reimagining Safety Task Force from East Oakland, the Flatlands. He'll be able to give you more background. But John, we'd love to hear from you and just your thoughts. It's important for folks to know and understand.
Hey, thank you. Good evening, everybody. I hope everyone is well and safe for you and your loved ones. My name is John Jones III. I'm a third generation East Oakland resident, and I'm a single father of two sons, ages 18 and 6. And I first want to begin by thanking Councilmember Taylor and all the members of this panel. I've had the pleasure of knowing them for quite some time, and not only am I familiar with their respective work, but most importantly, or importantly to me, I'm familiar with their heart. What's happening here when we talk about public safety, for me, we're talking about people. How do we value and love people? How do we make sure we're part of a process that will bring healing and hope to all Oaklanders? When the co-chairs, Council Members Taylor and Bass, reached out to me to join the task force, I did it for a number of reasons. The first, as I shared, by being a single father. And as my 18-year-old was sharing some of his experiences, including losing his friends to gun violence, I think all of us as parents, we could resonate with this idea that we want our kids to have a better life than we had. Right. And for me, it was just heartbreaking to know that despite all the work we have done, that these issues are still taking place. And for my youngest son in particular, at 6, I dare to dream of a world of Oakland 10 years from now. What would that be like for him and everyone else's age? The second reason why I joined this is because at the onset of COVID, I sadly shared that from my experience and perspective that the global pandemic, was going to lead to more crime and violence, gun violence, domestic violence, etc. And sadly, all these things came true. And I didn't quote unquote predict this because I have a crystal ball. Honestly, the conditions, the social-economic challenges that we are facing under COVID, in a lot of ways really are exasperating what already existed. I like to always remind people of the other C pandemic, the crack epidemic. We are still reeling from that situation. And there are some lessons to be learned in that, because everything is not all doom and gloom. There's some things we have learned, like, for example, the rise in gun violence was specifically alarming to those of us who are long-term residents who experienced this back in the 1980s and the 1990s. We knew it wasn't an aberration. It wasn't a one-off. I mean, it was just 1 year. It lasted for quite some time. And quite frankly, some of the conditions that we are experiencing today are eerily reminiscent from that time period. The response at that time was a call for more police and more draconian policies relating to mass incarceration. We now know today that that was an egregious mistake, something even our sitting president has acknowledged as the author of the crime bill. So it's very important that we look at these conditions, and most importantly, as it relates to solutions, there are some viable solutions. I think there's one key element that is often missing when I hear conversations around public safety and even what viable alternatives look like. It involves another C word, culture. I always share this. We don't live in one Oakland. Oakland is not a monolithic community. There are actually 5 or 6 different Oaklands coexisting together in parallel. I'm wearing a hat that says the town. More often than not, when I meet people who come to Oakland, I always ask them, why did you move here? And people always say, oh, I love the people, the weather, and the Black Panthers. I like to always remind people, I was born in 1974. So my generation, we didn't grow up being enamored with the Black Panthers, and no disrespect. We looked up to the pimp and the dope dealers. The Oakland I grew up in was shaped by people like Frank Ward and Felix Mitchell. And there is a real culture that contributes. That is really the root cause of a lot of acts of gun violence. It's not just poverty. There are unwritten rules, for example. So as someone who comes from the streets of Oakland, as someone who experienced violence both as a quote unquote perpetrator and a victim, I'm in a position to share that insight. Because as the chief was sharing earlier, I've been blessed to be a part of disrupting a lot of the violence only because of proximity in relationships, right? Having the trust of two parties that are beefing with each other, right? Being a credible messenger, them understanding my life journey and where I'm at to diffuse that. So we know that there are some things that police cannot do. There's also clearly some things police could and should do. So I want to put that out there for a reason, because going back to this culture, the sideshows, for example, is a part of the culture, part of the fabric of Oakland. It goes back to the 1970s. I attended my first sideshow in 1986 at the tender age of 12. And back then it was more peaceful because it was pretty much, police allowed us to have it at Eastmont in the parking lot. And we have the buy-in of the participants, because there's another thing at play that's really leading to a lot of crime and violence in our city. It's the impact of displacement. Oakland was a city historically that wouldn't let folks from outside our community come in and do dirt. There's a reason, for example, Oakland never had like the gangs from LA, like Crips and Bloods, or the gangs from Chicago. We didn't allow that to come here. We were a tight-knit community, but displacement has greatly uprooted our ability as community members to hold folks accountable. And if you look at these sideshows, I went to one yesterday, not on purpose. I just happened to be in the area, the one on High Street in MacArthur. But I can assure you, a majority of participants are not from the city of Oakland. Oakland has also for decades been a dumping ground for folks in other cities. Oakland's always been a place people will go to buy drugs, to buy sex, and to engage in these activities. So I think that as we have these conversations around reimagining, it's just important for all of us to be informed in every aspect and element of it. And that culture piece is crucial, because these are rules that young people do not create, but they are expected to be held accountable to it. And not just by their quote unquote enemies or opponents, but by their own peer groups. So once we're in a position to analyze all of that, then we are in a position to be closer to reimagining public safety for all people. And I just want to say one last thing before I turn it back over. And as it relates to the decreased homicide rate over the last several years, I think it's important to note that for the most part, the violence in Oakland has always been concentrated in a few neighborhoods. So we didn't experience that in a lot of, overall, we can say, yes, it decreased by the lake or downtown, things like that. But in deep East Oakland, it's business as usual. And even more so now. I mean, last year in January, we had one homicide. It's a 17-year-old boy around the corner from my prior residence. This January, we had 15. And this is something that's happened across the country. So I think it's important for us to be tuned in to these different realities that sometimes lie outside the scope of our own experience. So with that being said, I just want to thank you all. And I just look forward to this conversation and many more to come.
I want to thank you for that, John. I think by the words that you shared, the experience that you are lifting up, it's clear why it's important for you to be on the ground as part of our Reimagining Public Safety Task Force to keep things honest, right? You emphasize the fact that we've got deep-rooted challenges that we are up against, and these things weren't created overnight, and they're not going to be solved overnight. But that doesn't mean we give up and we don't attempt to improve and really strengthen our system that exists here. To that point, I think one of the things that I also kind of inferred from what you were saying is that we're not going to be able to arrest our way out of this. That is not that is not a long-term sustainable solution. We have to bring multiple solutions, multiple vantage points to really move the needle here. To that end, anchoring within the communities coming together, I know is a big part of the violence prevention strategy, really activating our neighborhoods, creating those relationships that hadn't existed, weren't there. And to that end, I do want to acknowledge that we have a number of our neighborhood council leaders who are on the line, and I want to just really lift you up. Thank you. I can't go with everybody by name, but having that tight fabric within our neighborhoods, within our communities, coming together to not just solve problems with respect to crime, but build that sense of community, that sense of belonging, that sense of support for each other is absolutely critical. So just want to lift up our NCPCs, NCPC leaders, neighborhood associations that are there as well. I'm not quite sure if Keisha made it in. If what we'll do is we'll continue to work on getting her connected. But in the meantime, I do want to acknowledge some of the questions that have been raised in in some of the emails that came out earlier, and I'll just point to a couple that I think are good to start us off. One is it emphasizing, we've talked about sideshows, and one of the things that I wanted to lift up is we've got someone who sent an email, and it's real. I got caught in one of these sideshows at 2 p.m. I was the first car stopped at the red light. It was absolutely terrifying. I had to sit it out, hoping and praying that none of the cars bashed into me. I was trapped and couldn't move. She then goes on to acknowledge, that things finally moved off to the next location. So thankful for that. And then really just asking, why we have to put up with this constantly. And the fact that the gunshots are happening is even more difficult to bear. So I wanted to lift that up. Another question related to sideshows, just to merge the two. Someone acknowledges 62nd between Foothill and Bancroft within the last month. The activity in my neighborhood has been terrible and unsafe. My neighbor's house was crashed into 2 doors down. So it is something that has roots in our culture. It's something that has gotten to a point where things are dangerous. And so I did want to give Chief Armstrong an opportunity to just respond to those folks who are feeling, frustrated that, hey, these are happening and we're kind of helpless. What can be shared? What can be done? How are we responding to that?
Yeah, so we are following the intelligence related to sideshow. We try to track where the next sideshow is going to occur. So during the week, we have an officer that monitors social media and tries to, identify where the group is going to land, what city they're going to land in, and what time. That's very challenging to pinpoint because the use of social media and their own sort of group chats allow them to communicate directly with one another. So it is very difficult to sort of pin down what city they're going to be in and what location. We have several traditional locations where we anticipate them coming to, 106 in MacArthur, High Street in Foothill, High in International, High in MacArthur, some of the intersections that they typically go to. But now what we're seeing is an increase of sideshow activity in different areas that we haven't experienced. Last night, with Bancroft and Fairfax was a huge location that was challenged last night. But also, sideshows have become much more violent than they had been in the past. We typically did not see the random firing of guns, particularly automatic weapons. And so it's a very difficult scene, particularly for law enforcement, because when law enforcement enters a large group like that with multiple firearms, it becomes a situation where someone can easily point that rifle at the police officer who is obviously in this marked car and begin firing. So we're cognizant of that. We're trying to utilize our helicopter, which becomes very important, but also we're cautious with that as well because they have shot at the helicopter as well in the past. And so these have become very dangerous incidents. And so really for us, with the budget cuts, we lost the funding that we were utilizing to deploy a significant number of officers on overtime to address sideshow. We don't have a standing sideshow detail to address that on a weekend to weekend basis. So we would supplement that by deploying officers on overtime and had a significant presence in the community. And that helped us prevent sideshow from occurring. But obviously COVID has had a tremendous impact on the city's budget, causing a cut to our overtime budget. So we no longer have the ability to deploy a large number of officers. So with the small number of officers that we have, it's been very challenging for us to manage these large sideshow events. And you know, individuals that participate in the sideshow have learned that Oakland is short these resources. And in the last 2 months, it has really, really taken off to the point where we've seen what we consider a 1,500% increase in sideshow activity in the city of Oakland. Like again, yesterday sideshow went for hours and hours. And so we are going to be coming to our city council members in the near future with some recommendations around potential support that we will need to be able to address that. So that is really my goal, is just to bring this to the city council's meeting and allow council members to determine what might be the appropriate way for us to respond to this, because currently we don't have the resources.
Thank you for that, Chief Armstrong, and thank you for just breaking it down. I do want to acknowledge that we did have a poll question in the poll that asked, and my goal is to be very transparent in terms of the decisions that are up for us, right? And I think what I heard from you in a conversation yesterday, Chief Armstrong, is that we're looking at somewhere between $70,000 and $100,000 to have sideshow detail activated on a weekend. That is not an insignificant amount of money to spend, but yet we recognize the safety challenges that exist. And so the poll question, just so that you guys if you're not seeing it now, it acknowledged that was the question: should we spend $70,000 to $100,000 to increase overtime to stay on top of sideshows? And the response we had, about 35% said yes, 43% said it depends, 9% said no, and 13% were undecided. And so I think that just indicates that it's not as easy of a solution when we look at the magnitude of the resources, because what could also be done with $70,000, $100,000. At the same time, I will publicly state that I am supportive of the request to increase resources so we can have more focus on sideshows and responsiveness to that. A big piece for me is going to be making sure that we are efficient with that, not just putting money out there, but being efficient with our response and making sure we're getting what we need to out of that in terms of managing the safety, specifically the safety that is threatened when sideshows are happening. Thank you for that, Chief Armstrong. And it looks like we have Keisha in the room. Keisha, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. So Keisha, while you were getting reconnected, John shared a little bit, but I wanted to give you the opportunity as well as the D6 representative to the task force to just introduce yourself and share some of your thoughts relative to reimagining safety. And I'm going to read off one of the questions that we got earlier that maybe you can answer at the end of your talk. And the question reads: I understand the emotional background behind defund the police movement, but I fear that if funding is truly decreased, it will make our city more prone to crime. I can see how utilizing non-police folks for behavioral situations involving mentally ill people or other nonviolent situations may be helpful, but is there a middle ground where we can all feel safe and respected at the same time? So in addition to what you were saying, I wanted to give you that as a prompt as you talk about the reimagining safety process and how you see your role representing District 6 and just representing the community there.
So hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. I am, like Councilman Taylor said, the D6 Public Safety representative for the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force Board. I was born and raised in District 6 my entire life. And so I've been living in the Flatlands, I want to say, basically my entire life. And one of the things I think that is so important is that as we're trying to come back to a holistic approach of trusting the law enforcement again and trying to get back to having a better relationship with them, I think that we all do, again, have to hold ourselves accountable, and we have to lead with not our emotions, but also being realistic with what we have at hand. One of the things that I've been doing in my community is that when we do like our community cleanups, we have invited OPD out to come and help us clean up. And it's not the simple fact of them just coming out and sitting in their cars and just, you know, enforcing the law that way, but they actually got out and helped us pull up our weeds in our yards and helped us clean up, which was a very positive impact for our community. A lot of people was actually amazed to see officers in their uniform actually cleaning up and helping us in the community. So that was a positive thing that happened in my community. And also just that we begin to reimagine how community policing and what that will look like moving forward. Because I think now that we have a reduction in officers, right now, what's really going to have to help is that the community and the officers work hand in hand, which will be community policing. And where I live at, I live in an area where they label it as the killer zone. And so I'm very much well impacted, and is some days I have to figure out which ways do I want to turn down my block to avoid a possible gunshot or a possible someone may hit my cars or something of that nature. And so I just think it's very important that we all try to work together as a community, and that we also bring the neighbor back in neighborhood and not just leaving it as the hood. And so to answer that question, I think that we have to start back partnering up with OPD, and also to just know from you, Chief Armstrong, what will community policing look like and what strategies will be given to the community now that we have such a reduction in our communities right now, and especially in the most impacted communities.
Thanks for that, Keisha. Was that a direct question to Chief Armstrong?
Yes.
Okay. If you don't mind, Chief.
No, I think these are the solutions that we have to come up with together. I think one of the things that Chief Cespedes and I have been talking about is putting together these groups, community forums of community members, law enforcement, and members of DVP to come up with neighborhood solutions, right? Allowing all of us to come to the table and not one particular group making a decision for a community, right? Making it a community-led decision. And so that's, we've identified some of what we call high stress beats where violence is occurring, calls for service are high, and we plan to bring all of these three groups together and solve problems together. And so I think that is sort of what we look at as reimagining, right? New ways of solving problems at the community level and at the grassroots level. And so you will see that type of community policing from me, along with my partnership with DVP moving forward.
Thank you for that, Chief. I'm gonna focus us. I see a few additional questions I'm gonna read in the chat here. One is focused on, we have a few intersections that have been targets for sideshows and other activity. Skyline and Keller has been identified. I know there are others that have been identified as well. And there's a question, has there been any research into changing the environment that encourages a sideshow, traffic circles or other types of roadblocks? So environment is one. Another question that I saw is, it's related to, do other cities in Northern California or California in general have this problem with sideshows? If so, how are they dealing with it? To kind of understand that piece. And then the question around, where does the cost of sideshow patrolling come from? And so I can address an aspect of the infrastructure side, the environmental design. I know that that is one that we have looked at with the Department of Transportation across various parts of District 6. Many people identify roundabouts as a permanent sort of infrastructure installation that could help to deter sideshows. That is fair and accurate in many cases. I want to acknowledge that in other cases, the roundabouts serve as an obstacle, and people see that as a challenge. So I don't think we will ever like permanently stop behavior other than closing down a street, but there are certain things that can be done, and we are working with our Department of Transportation to implement some of those solutions. One of which there is an effort to implement lane markers, the sort of 2 foot, 3 foot lane markers at Skyline and Keller in order to help to guide traffic more, but then also to inhibit that from being treated as an open sort of asphalt where different tricks could be sort of done, stunting with cars, et cetera. Nothing's guaranteed foolproof, but we are exploring different options in partnership with law enforcement and our transportation, Department of Transportation. Chief, are you able to share what other jurisdictions are doing? Is it just an Oakland thing? Is it broader, both within the Bay Area and then also maybe even beyond that?
Yeah, Sideshow originally started in Oakland, but now it's pretty much California-wide. There's events called Bay to LA where cars come all the way from Los Angeles to do Sideshow in the Bay Area. It's impacted several cities in the East Bay in particular. They've been in Fremont, Hayward, San Francisco, Vallejo, Berkeley, Emeryville. All of the local cities have been impacted at some point by Sideshow. And so the activity is not just centered in Oakland, but Oakland is the hub, right? Oakland is, the inventor, the original city for Sideshow. And so it will always be the sort of epicenter of where videos are filmed, where people will come with the largest of groups coming into Oakland. And so Oakland is obviously, at the forefront of the Sideshow activity. And so that's a challenge for us, but it is impacting other cities. We haven't seen a comprehensive strategy pushed forward by any city other than a significant amount of resources being deployed to address it. CHP has taken on, California Highway Patrol has taken on a strategy of shutting down freeway entrances and not allowing those to enter the freeway in order to keep them on city streets. And so there is a challenge around working collectively with other law enforcement groups because other cities don't want them to enter their cities as well.
Thank you for that. And then the question, I'll address the question around where do the dollars for Sideshow overtime come from? That comes straight out of our general fund. So that is directly competing with the programming for Parks and Rec, other youth services, and broad range of things that we invest in. And so that's the answer there. To just move a little bit deeper into what Chief Armstrong mentioned, as he is bringing requests to the council to enhance and increase budget spend, as Chief Cespedes is also lifting things up to the council for approval with our spend authority, et cetera. It is important that the voice of East Oakland and District 6 be heard in that process. And so I appreciate everyone emailing me. That is absolutely critical, but it is also important to let the other council members and other elected officials, the mayor and others, know what is important and critical for District 6. So I believe that our team put in the chat the email address so that everyone can email the entire council. It's council, COUNCIL @oaklandca.gov. And that's a way to let everyone know what your thoughts are, how you feel about upcoming budget decisions, et cetera. Also, subscribing to our newsletter. We are making sure that upcoming key decisions are made known so that folks could plan to join council meetings and publicly make their statements as well. Oftentimes, the voices that we hear in these meetings are the voices who are professionally organized to show up and may not reflect what is sort of needed and desired within in the community, in the district, and sort of on the ground in the neighborhoods. And so that's why it's important to stay engaged and involved. I'm going to go to, I think I see a hand raised, a very concerned citizen. And so a very concerned citizen, I'm going to allow you to unmute yourself and go ahead and make your comment or statement. And if you could keep it brief so that we can hear from others as well.
Thank you. Thank you. I didn't expect to get the opportunity to speak. And so thank you for gathering the town hall. And so in the interest of time, I'll be coaching. And so thank you for recognizing concerned citizens. And so want to live in a solution. And so this somewhat, and want to sound solution oriented, but this somewhat sounds like a shakedown with all due respect, Honorable Councilman, with us merely throwing resources, another what, $30 million in overtime that we'll ultimately end up spending next year, opposed to looking to strategize more effectively. It still continues to be the case that the operations, strategies, and tactics associated with Measure Z funding don't align. It's a lot of stuff happening in the community, broken up, but nothing that's really attached to the things that you guys are communicating about on the phone, which I'm pleased to be hearing about. And so we're asking now to trust in and not defund, but pay overtime to a department which 90% of the officers are from outside of Oakland or have never lived in Oakland, and 90%, or excuse me, and another 90 are on like what I understand to be paid administrative leave. And so that's after what we've just heard, 18 years of federal receivership. And so it's many of us in the community that were at the sideshows yesterday and at the ones the day before that resulted in gunfire, like the good chief spoken to. It's different when your kids are out there and it results in gunfire. And so it's different than these calls that we're privileged to be able to be a part of. So just want to underscore that. But this is like in the background, 552. AR-15 that was shot right by my son, that you'll hear that shot 36 times consecutively, as we were able to hear on this video. And so, and officers were there. And so it just it begs the question, why aren't we utilizing mutual aid, whereas we could align these 20 different law enforcement agencies that are here in the Bay Area, in Alameda County, excuse me, to kind of like offset some of the expenditures, opposed to throwing this at taxpayers, those that would like resources, whose kids don't go to the youth centers that we've heard, with all due respect to them, kids who just don't go there, kids who are at Sunnyside Park while this is happening yesterday. And so, yeah, in closing, just want to imagine how we could reinvest some of what we're doing in reimagining public safety. That's real dandy. I appreciate hearing about that. But how can we reimagine a more equitable solution where we somewhat invert this structure, where there's a much more significant piece of this 28 million going towards people who can do this work in the community, people who have been attached to gun and gang crime activity historically here in the city of Oakland, people who could resist some of the Crips and Bloods who now overrun the city of Oakland, as well as the hundreds of other gangs. We have natural resources here that we could be employing that we're not. And now that they now stand on the side of these sideshows as I'm watching guys that used to be involved in doing this work. So thank you for the time to speak. On behalf of us concerned citizens, you guys keep up the good work and having these meetings. I'll be tuned in.
And I was on mute. Thank you for that. I appreciate the comments. One of the, you know what, I'd like to turn it over to Chief Cespedes, if you will, to respond to the comments, because I think it's absolutely accurate. We can't just continue to throw money at a situation and think that that's going to solve everything and solve it sustainably. And as we reimagine and really sort of come up with a new way of framing and looking at things, one thing that was mentioned is the aspect of using those who are on the ground, who are connected to community, have the credibility, and can help to interrupt the violence and shift the I guess the focus of those we are trying to serve, so that they're being empowered and not just sort of criminalized. So maybe you could speak to aspects of how that aspect of violence prevention and the use of credible messengers and violence interrupters.
Absolutely. I think what we do know from the previous work in Oakland and what we do know nationally is that finding credible messengers that are really truly credible, as John Jones mentioned earlier, is very, very difficult. However, I don't think that if we can interrupt violence exclusively with a professional group. I do think we do need neighborhood embedded people that are willing to work on behalf of that neighborhood to interrupt the violence. We know what those neighborhoods are. You know, I think if we look at data, 52% of shootings with injury come from particular police beats. And they've been coming from particular police beats for decades. So it is those beats, those neighborhoods that we need to recruit the partnership of folks that can interrupt the violence. That is different than the fireproofing. That is immediate response, and it's very difficult to get it right. One of the, I do consider John Jones a thought partner, and some of the most enlightening conversations I've had in the city about that issue has been with him. So concerned citizen, I am personally very much in agreement that we need to get better at recruiting and working with the folks that have the credibility to, I call them decision makers. I don't like the title shot callers, the people that have the ability to influence others. And that's the particular kind of individual that we look forward to working with.
Great, thank you for that. I'm going to go to another hand that's raised. I see Sharon Lee. Ms. Lee, I'm going to unmute you and give you a chance to make a statement or comment.
Hi, it's actually Sharon Lee.
Come on. Apologies, thank you. Sharon.
No worries. I would like to see something also built into the infrastructure. There are many MOUs that go by every 3 to 5 years for most government agencies, particularly police agencies and many other agencies, that I know the fire department has something where they have community service hours built into their MOU. I would like to see something like that that also is built into police MOUs, where they're forced to donate a portion of their time in order to assist in whatever community event there is. I would like to say that I work within the government, and there are many, 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 many resources available. So, but we also have many people who just are not willing to or don't want to participate in those services. I had an unfortunate incident on this past Thursday where I was sitting in my vehicle when the back window was shot out, which is inches from me, and my tire was shot out. And I'm in a crossroads. Do I get out the car and try to get somewhere safe, though I know they weren't shooting at me? Or do I just stay where I am and hunker down and hope that whatever bullets were going off did not hit me? I would, not just in terms of credible messengers, but I would like to see alternative forms of what community involvement means. Many of us have very busy schedules, and there are time slots. I may not be able to donate a whole Saturday, but there may be something that I can do. So maybe there's a group sign up where people who are interested and do want to participate in things involving in the community. I mean, I assist my church in Oakland with giving out USDA food bags every third Saturday. I know that's one Saturday, 3 hours I can commit to. I may not be able to commit to an entire function, but I may have a specialty in web design, or someone else may have a specialty in whatever it may be. But being able to utilize all of those specialties to allow people to come together in those kind of forums. And also to send polls out to ask the community what they think. and don't make them close-ended. There was a poll that went out as you logged on here that said, you know, they asked about the zip code, they asked about whether you think they should spend more or less or about the same. But the question should also include, how can money be rearranged? I live on one of the corners where the police sit on the corner. That is not a deterrent for many people who hang on that corner. So could that money be used a different way? And if the officer is just going to sit in the car and not really pay attention to anything that's going on, does that really benefit the community? So when we talk about community answers, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 5 neighbors surrounding my house who are older, who are seasoned, we call them seasoned. They will not leave their house after a certain time, and I don't think that's fair to them. So something that engages them as well, because many of them, they have children who know people within the community. I grew up in Oakland, so I don't like seeing it like this. And unfortunately, probably when I retire, I may be looking at my descent just because I want to be safe.
Thank you for that, Sharon. I think critical and valid points. As far as collecting and gathering more sort of open-ended responses and recommendations, definitely welcome that. I'm going to ask my team to make sure that we put into the chat. We've got a couple ways to provide that. One is please email my office and we will make sure that those recommendations get elevated to the Reimagining Safety Task Force. I know that we've got Keisha and John on the line, and we may have other task force members as well, but that's part of the process that we have started going through and are continuing to do, is actually receive that that input and that feedback. And so thank you for that. And in addition, we are exploring, we have explored and have gone through other ways of engaging with the community as well. So you can always reach out to my office and we will make sure that those recommendations get incorporated into the process there. I think all of the other comments you made are extremely critical and valuable. We need to make sure that our elders are not feeling as though they cannot leave their house after a certain period of time, at a certain time at night for what's going on. And so engaging them and supporting them is absolutely critical. Next, actually, I'm going to go to either Lena or Pamela on the team. Are there questions that have come in that we should also lift up? I'm trying to balance both the hands and the questions that are being sent in.
I think that the hands are covering much of what the questions were in advance.
Okay, let's go ahead and go to Ms. Charla Blackman then. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Oh, hold on, Basma.
Oh, let's see. Ms. Blackman, are you there?
Yeah, I am. Can you
Okay.
hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay. So one of the questions I wanted to ask was, are Oakland police officers required to wear body cams? And if so, if not, why not? And if so, if they don't follow that rule, are there repercussions? And I'm going to be quick. And the other is just a comment. It's just a thought. What is it about Oakland that attracts prostitution, drug dealers, dumping, murders, people shooting guns off, sideshows? I would be willing to bet you that the equation is the same. And I think that's what the focus should be. If you could figure out that equation, I think it would fit each one of those categories, because other cities are not impacted as much as we are. So there's something about Oakland that attracts this. And what is it? If you can figure out, I don't know. I don't have the answer, but I'm just saying, I think the equation would be the same for each one of those issues.
Thank you for that. I'm going to see if Chief Armstrong can answer one, if not both of those questions?
I think the first question is yes, per our policy, officers are mandated, all uniform officers are mandated to have on their body worn camera. They are all issued body worn cameras. And if they don't activate that body worn camera according to policy, they face significant discipline. Initially, it starts off as additional training. Second time, it escalates up to potentially a suspension, and if it continues to occur, it could lead to termination. Your second question, I think you're right. I think we all have to have an honest conversation to figure out what is that equation. Why are so many attracted to Oakland to commit criminal acts? I think that's the reality of us having an honest conversation of what public safety looks like in our city, and just acknowledging that if we don't come together and come up with a holistic approach to it, we will continue to attract people to Oakland committing crime. So.
Thank you, Chief. Next, we're going to go to Daniel E. Daniel E., I'm going to ask you to unmute. Are you there?
I'm here. Thank you, Councilmember Taylor. My name is Daniel Etlinger. I'm part of the Community Policing Advisory Board. I'm a board member, and my question is directed for Chief Cespedes and Chief Armstrong. I'm wondering if they can talk a little bit about ceasefire and how it's overlapping with the Department of Violence Prevention. As many of us know, ceasefire is one of the programs to be cut, and I'm just wondering what collaboration these two entities have with each other, as ceasefire was such a positive program and was very successful. So I'm just curious as to that. Thank you.
I'll talk about the social program side of ceasefire. The Department of Violence Prevention provides life coaching services and other wraparound services to those who are identified by the ceasefire program. So before it became the Department of Violence Prevention, it was Oakland Unite. And historically, Oakland Unite and now the Department of Violence Prevention have the mandate to provide services to those who are at the highest level of risk for either pulling the trigger or having the gun pointed at them. And these are sort of the hardest to engage population, I would say, in the country. Human beings, I don't want to call them population. And so our role is to engage those members and provide services to them and their family, aiming them. These are services that are designed to sort of get people to make more rational, informed decisions or better decisions. So the collaboration has continued to be as strong as it's been for years. I think what's changed over the last year has been the inability to connect with as many people person to person because of the pandemic. So the strategy that, in other words, the DVP provides life coaching and wraparound services to ceasefire clients. And perhaps, Chief Armstrong, who is one of the architects of that approach, can speak to the other parts of the partnerships, which include law enforcement and the faith-based community.
Yeah, our ceasefire approach continues to be the same. I think largely to Chief Cespedes' point, we were severely impacted by the pandemic and the inability to directly communicate with those that are at the highest risk of being either a victim of a shooting or potentially pulling the trigger. So we are continuing to be laser focused on those involved in gun violence. We just had a call in last week, calling in a group of individuals that were at the highest risk. So we know that this strategy works. And I think, the unique perspective that I bring is similar to John Jones. We know that there isn't, not everybody in the city of Oakland is carrying a gun or shooting a gun. is just a small percentage of individuals that actually drive violence in our city. And so our strategy is to really be focused on those individuals and not impact other people, right? But not be focused on them in a way in which we want to remove them from the community. I think to Chief Cespedes' point, we want to first let them know that there are other options. There are other opportunities, and DVP does a phenomenal job with their life coaches, people who have credibility, giving them access to different resources and support and helping them navigate their way into a positive lifestyle. But if they choose to continue to be involved in violence, we want to be clear that the other option on the table clearly is enforcement. We don't want to use it, but it's there because we can't allow people to continue to shoot or be involved in violence in our community. And so we feel like it's an effective strategy. Definitely have been impacted by the pandemic, but we are now being creative about how we're communicating with this group, and we are moving forward. And so thanks to DVP and our faith-based partners who are there to support as well during our weekend night walks, communicating, doing direct communication as well. We all are in partnership and moving forward.
Thank you for that, Chief Armstrong. I want to take a moment to read one of the comments that was sent to me in the chat, and it reads, "It's not only the elders who cannot leave their house safely, none of us, if we can help it, are able to leave our house. There was a shooting right outside of our house a few weeks ago. Our Ring camera caught it, and me volunteering with youth is not going to stop this. People are already volunteering with youth. My sense is that it's not teens causing the dangerous mayhem, but adult young men. How about put down your guns, and in exchange, the city will give you a job?" Chief Cespedes, I know that your violence prevention strategy is very focused on the aspect of targeting specific populations, specific regions, geographies, et cetera. The question was raised about who is causing the violence and the danger, and then what are we doing to specifically, and my question is, what are we doing to specifically target them? And then I will come back and answer aspects relative to the economics and associated with other solutions around those economic opportunities.
Councilmember, what we do know about Oakland, both the population doing the shooting and those being affected by the shooting since 2016 is that the average age, the majority of them, the average age, close to 90% of them are 30-year-olds. So it is not Oakland youth that we need to provide services to them, but that's a different kind of service. So who is doing the shooting in Oakland? It appears to be, based on data, that it's primarily men, and primarily the average age is 30 years of age. So what are we doing? We were just talking about this approach of identifying those men, primarily men, and providing services to them that are alternatives to continuing that lifestyle or to being incarcerated. The youth population requires a different kind of service, which is not, it is not necessarily the same approach because they're not involved. They need prevention rather than intervention. So that's what we're doing.
Thank you for that, Chief. And I think that's important to know, that we are using a data-driven approach of engaging and interfacing with different populations in order to address them where they are and to move things forward. I did want to address the aspect around, creating financial and economic opportunities for folks as a way of violence prevention and shifting towards alternative decision-making on the streets. And that's one that has been a priority of mine. And I wanted to just emphasize that there are a number of interventions that we are really moving towards in that. Some of which in East Oakland, we are focused on building entrepreneurship skills and really targeting those towards those geographies, those neighborhoods that are most impacted with our new ESO Ventures Entrepreneurship Incubator. We've got increased targeting relative to our workforce development programming to give folks alternative paths and resources, partnerships with the community colleges, also the building trades and others there. So there are efforts that are underway, and I think the thing that I'm excited about is we're starting to see more targeting of those resources in coordination with Department of Violence Prevention, in coordination with these groups, so that we're now having much more, I will say, interdepartmental efforts to move these intractable, otherwise seemingly intractable issues that arise. So did want to lift that up. Next in the queue, I see Eric Foster. Eric, I'm going to unmute you and give you a chance to speak. Are you there?
Yeah. How you doing? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Eric.
How you doing? I just wanted to say it's refreshing to hear on this call how a lot of us are all on the same page in terms of having the understanding that connecting with people from the community, not the so-called shot callers, is a major factor in us being successful in bringing down the gun violence. And so that's a narrative. And I've been in a lot of meetings, and you don't hear that often. And so, like I said, it's refreshing. I also want to just give a shout out to the organizations in East and West Oakland that that's already doing the work, that's already hiring different individuals who have lived experience and who have that do have the ability to make decisions. And so we got to highlight that, and so some of the individuals already touched on not defunding the police, but just making sure that we're giving those people and those organizations the necessary funding so that we can make a difference. I know that one of the comments before was mentioning how we don't think that giving jobs and will help teens put the guns down, but we got to start somewhere, and so that is a big factor, because they don't have the resources a lot of times in different communities. And so if we can provide them with services and we can provide them with a vision to see something different, we can definitely make a change. And if we can continue to connect and work with organizations that's hiring people that's getting out of jail and all of that, we can really make a change and just working together. I know ceasefire, some people feel like it was unsuccessful and some people feel like it was successful, but we know that we have to make a change. We have to definitely make a change. And so one of my questions was just, how do we, hello?
Yeah, we're still here. Go ahead, Eric.
I think I'm having technical, hello?
You there, Eric? We can hear you.
Yeah, so my question is, how do we, get those conductors of the violent criminal activity? How do we get them involved in this reimagining the task force? How do we, bring them in to make a greater impact? I think the chief kind of touched on it a little bit, but yeah, that's one of my questions. And I also want to add too, before we move on, this is just a sidebar, is that I know we spent a lot of time on the sideshows, and that's important. But one of the things I noticed, I like a lot of these stores that's in the community, I saw that they going around collecting food from the churches and things and reselling them right back to the people, and so I witnessed that when I was on MacArthur, and it was like 3 cars pulled up, and as I was driving back across the street, down the street, I saw a big sign saying free fruits and vegetables, and so we have to make sure that, we constantly focusing on the negative of our people, but we constantly being exploited also, and so we got to make sure we touching on that and not allowing the individuals in the community get exploited in that way, especially by the so-called small businesses that's supposed to be helping in the community. A lot of times are not really giving back to the community. So we got to make sure that we really giving the tools to those with lived experience. So that's my question. How do we bring them all in? And then we got to make sure that we're not allowing outside people to continuously exploit the community.
Thank you for both of those statements. As far as how we bring in those who are most on the ground and can be partner, maybe Chief Cespedes?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
I think the question is for those who are on the ground, those doing the work right now, have those trusted relationships with the community in a way to help move folks to sort of I would say more productive, less unsafe and violent lifestyles. How do we pull them in? How do we engage with them more? And I know that we've got the Reimagining Safety Task Force that's lifting up different folks, but not everyone's connected to the city as one of its current vendors or current partners.
Correct.
How do we engage and create those opportunities?
I think step one, contact me directly, and we'll start from there. I will put my email in the chat, and contact me directly, and we will start from there. The city, we need to figure out other sources of funding besides city funding to get some of this work on the ground. But the best place to start is for us to start collaborating that directly. So I will put my email in the chat room and reach out to me directly.
Thank you for that, Chief. And I see John with his finger up wanting to add to it. Go ahead, John.
Yes, real quickly, and it also connects back to a previous question. I want to go back to culture real quick. And I think it's important, like, for example, when I came home from prison in 2012, after experiencing being homeless and unemployed, I got involved with community organizing. And it's important to share this part. Going back to the concept, there are different Oaklands. This world that we're in, as much as we love it, to the streets, this is considered square stuff. We just have to have that humility to understand that this isn't a safe space for folks in the streets. My own people was looking at me crazy, like, what are you doing, right? So I want to name that it's challenging to get people involved for a number of reasons. And the second one is really a matter of protecting them. Like some of the folks I know are still involved in certain lifestyles, so they don't want to incriminate themselves, right? So I just think it's important to just name that as well. Like we're dealing with a culture that doesn't necessarily view this space as something that they want to be a part of. So it becomes a matter of how can we, instead of trying to go to them and push a message off on them, we have to have them lead the conversation and inform us towards the direction that we need to go. And last, like someone said, really in this digital divide is greatly revealed the lack of authentic engagement. Because it's a privilege for us to be on this call right now, for example. But the people who need to be here, quite frankly, were the ones who were at the sideshow yesterday. So sometimes we got to go to the people. We have to meet them where they at. And I know it's challenging. I don't encourage anyone. I mean, be safe. We're dealing with a pandemic. But at the end of the day, it's going to take that level of buy-in as well.
Thank you for that, John. Okay, I see next in the queue, Bruce Schmicken. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. I'm asking you to unmute.
That was very good. I'm impressed. That was one of the best I've heard at a first try. So I'm Bruce, and I work with Faith in Action East Bay and the Coalition for Police Accountability. And you know, Faith in Action was very involved early on in bringing ceasefire to Oakland, and our community engagement efforts around it had been hampered a lot by COVID. I won't go into all that, but I'm glad to hear about ceasefire, and I think, well, let me say this first. Since this task force started, this is the first, as much as I hear what John is saying about who really needs to be here, this is the first meeting I've seen where there was fairly broad, just generic community engagement and representation. I haven't seen that yet with the task force. I've seen some surveys and they've gone out and whatnot, but we really need to get, you know, regular folks in on this thing from the ground floor, or it's not going to fly. And I think that I've tried to read the 115, I mean, I haven't tried to read it, I've been going through systematically the 115 recommendations from the task force. And, you know, I don't have college degrees and all that, but I read a lot, and I've worked with police commissioners on OPD policy changes and things like that. So I think I have an easier grasp of that than a lot of people do. And I'm finding it impenetrable. I'm finding the way it's organized weird, because it's not oriented toward these are the problems that we've identified and then these are possible ways we can address those. I don't think anybody's going to get through that who doesn't have a lot of time on their hands and kind of a background in research and all kinds of stuff. And also the recommendations aren't qualitatively the same, like not even close. So there's no, it's really, I'm disappointed in the way this is presented. I'm disappointed in the community engagement. I really want to thank you because I think this is a really good start. We're trying to do our own community engagement with Faith in Action. We're having some meetings. John's coming to one of ours Wednesday. And I just want to say also, trying to wrap this up and not, filibuster, but we have a lot of programs in Oakland that measure Y and Z money have gone to. And I know a lot of them are great, but I would like to see an assessment of what has been really working and what's really worthy of additional investment and what maybe has been kind of so-so because we have limited resources. So I'd like to start with stuff that is happening, like ceasefire, like existing programs, and build up those that seem to have the greatest potential. We've also been involved in the macro thing, the 911 alternative, which is a very powerful thing, and we started work on that well before the task force got around. So anyway, a few thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Bruce. I appreciate you lifting up the I would say, what you have observed relative to the task force and who's kind of there speaking, the representing. And I just wanted to emphasize that that's one of the reasons why it was important for me to make sure that we had solid representation on the task force. We've got John Jones, we've got Keisha, we've got other folks from East Oakland, Flatlands, who actually know this nuance that we're trying to balance and really understand that it's not, we can't just be 100% ideological and not grounded in facts and reality on the ground, while at the same time, we do need to acknowledge the need to be transformative and actually look to new ways of doing things. And so I'm grateful for their participation. I'm grateful for opportunities like this for those to engage. I want to encourage folks to, if you have ideas, suggestions, things that we could or should be doing differently, don't hesitate to reach out to my office, District 6, District numeral 6 at oaklandca.gov, and we will make sure to elevate those concerns, ideas, thoughts, questions, critiques to the appropriate place and location. I wanted to acknowledge next in our queue that we had Philip Sadiq. Philip, you're up next. I'm going to go ahead and give you the opportunity to unmute.
Okay, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Okay, first of all, it's my first meeting, and believe me, I appreciate this oh so much. And to see what's planning, what, are the things that are going forward. I want to dovetail on what Bruce said. I've been an Oakland resident for 50 something. I'm 62. So I've been here a long time, and I've seen programs come and go, and there must be some accountability. If said programs are not working, it might be a difficult choice, but they have to be cut loose. Because as you said, we're limited resources, and we can't just throw money around for every program that comes up if it's not being successful. Second point, I think one young lady was on the on the video saying that the police need to come from Oakland. I've had run-ins with the police, and when I call 911, they come, and I appreciate that. Now, as far as police living in the city of Oakland, I think it was similar to what John was saying, but different. John's in the community, on the ground, in spaces that, quote, regular people cannot get to. And he's being called certain names. So if the police are from Oakland, will they be called, quote, certain names because they live in the hood? Like, okay, man, that's a snitch over there. So that might be a consideration. I'd like them all to come from Oakland, but that's just not a reality of the situation. And I think the young lady also said, as far as a MOU about some of the, fire department, they have to volunteer. That's good. But what we don't want is someone, quote, forced to volunteer If they're forced to, they may poison the entire process. What's that? One bad apple spoils a bunch. But as I said, I appreciate this meeting. I appreciate what's going to happen going forward. And I work at the local trauma hospital, so I get a chance to meet a lot of young Black men. And when I address them, I call them sir. And I see in their eyes, they're like, oh, this is an adult Black man calling me sir. And I can see no one has given them that respect. I will talk to them as I would hope someone would talk to me, and then we kind of get along. And as you said, when someone's shot, it's a lot of trauma there. Some of them are angry, and then we have to deal with that. But it's that's all I have to say. As I said, I'm looking forward to good things in Oakland happening from this, and wrapping it around, as I said before, harping on it. If the program is not working, then you got to cut it loose. We don't have a bottomless pit of money. Because we did, hey, give me some. I'd like some too.
Thank you for that, Philip.
You're welcome.
Yes, I want to just jump on top of what you're saying relative to measuring the performance of those things that we are investing in. And that is absolutely critical, both with respect to our city government. I've been pushing since day one, and I came into office, that we need a true performance management, performance measurement system within the city to make sure that we are doing what we say we want to do. We can't just set goals and then set it and then forget it and just keep going about our business, but not evaluate how we're performing. Similarly, we need to have that same expectation of our partners and our contractors. So when we go to an organization in the community that's doing a project and a service, and I will say going beyond just saying, hey, we need some metrics, because oftentimes what that means is, well, how many people did you actually talk to, or how many people? It's not about quantity. It should be about outcomes and the impact that we're creating. And so that's something that I will continue pushing for. I know that it's not that easy, and people have a lot of reasons why we can't do it, but it's absolutely critical, because if we don't measure it, we don't know whether or not we're achieving it and moving that forward. Miss Regina, I saw you nodding and snapping. I wasn't sure if you wanted to jump in on anything that was said recently.
Certainly. I just appreciate so much of the community raising the issues. I think one of the problems is what John Jones mentioned, and maybe as Chief Cespedes, we need to understand those 30-year-olds that are criminalizing and brutalizing Oakland people. They are likely, either suffering from something, and that doesn't make what they're doing correct at all. But, when we talk about folks that are in pain, they create pain. We need to be reaching out and grabbing hold of those folks and, putting them in some kind of a rehabilitation idea. And I think ceasefire is kind of a one-way, it's actually more of a wrapping around all of their orifices, because criminalizing is a one-way street, to death. And some folks can turn around if given the proper support systems and incentives. We see one of our best examples of community activism in John Jones. And there are those of you, let's face it, that will be like, oh, you were a felon, you were in jail. Oh. Well, we have to learn to see past what people's mistakes are, especially when they have completed their penance, when they have paid back the responsibility that has been made, and then given them a second opportunity to get it right. I do that work with young people. 30-year-olds, that's way out of that trajectory, but some are doing it because that's what they've always done. Some are doing it because they have been pained. Not making an excuse for it, just trying to create some insight to it.
Thank you for that. Let's see, I want to acknowledge the fact that we are over time. We had initially planned an hour and a half. We are rounding out 2 hours. I want to, close things out in the next 7 minutes so that we stick to that 2 hour mark. So I'm going to take 3 more hands. I see Phil. We just did Philip. I'm going to go to Jose R., Steve Beck, and then Sudeep Ray. And hopefully we can get through relatively quickly. Jose R., I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Go ahead. Jose, are you able to unmute?
Oh, hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, my apologies. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for all the presenters. I am a resident. I'm one of your residents here in District 6. I've been in Oakland for over 20 years. And so I have questions, and I have 3 questions. One for the Department of Violence Prevention. That's one. And they also have one for the Police Commission for Miss Miss Regina, sorry. And then I have another question for between Loren Taylor and OPD Chief Armstrong. So my first one is for the violence prevention. We can, I think what we're getting stuck also, we have to look at analysis by paralysis, right? I think that how can we actually go and actually take action? The violence prevention, I know they've started last year, and there is money from Measure Z going into it. I mean, if you think about the Oakland City budget, it is $1.6 billion, and the violence prevention budget is $30 million, which is 1.8% of the total budget. So we have to really start thinking about the money that is already going into it and what can we already start doing, right? We're just doing more analysis, more evaluations. We really need to start seeing some results. The other question is for Ms. Jackson. How do we check? How do we do check and balances with kind of providing or requesting requesting more reports, right? Between protocols that we're asking, or new protocols that we're asking for OPD to do or officers to report out, in at the same time making those processes more inefficient. So we're asking an officer to start reporting out X, Y, and Z, but then they have multiple platforms to record information, and it's not very streamlined. They're still not in the 21st century in terms of technology. So how do we make sure that we're in between, those the protocols that we're requesting and writing to enforce law with that? How to make sure that we're not making the process more inefficient? The last question is for between Loren Taylor and OPD, is that how is it that going back to someone asked a question about the equation. The equation is that a lot of the districts have between area 1 and 4 have a lot less crime than area 5, but how is it possible that we always get less resources? Like how does that even work? So recently you saw Nikki Bass went in and asked, say, I want the patrols back, and then snap of a finger, she gets everything, So, but how come in area 5, where if you look at the amount of just resources that we get in any department, and this has been happening over history, how is it that we get less resources? Like, how does that equation work? And then lastly, Loren Taylor, I know this is half of your term and you're going into the other half, and you have set goals, and how are we doing there in terms of getting those resources into District 6?
Great. I'm going to turn it over to Chief Armstrong to talk about I guess, one, I want you to touch on the allocation of resources, because specifically mentioned was the addition of a specific role, or the recovery of a role in District 2. And I know that you and I are both fully committed and have been bringing more resources to East Oakland in a way that may not be elevated. So I'd love for you to just address what is actually happening that may not necessarily get the main headlines that at least that were referred to here.
Yeah, so I think, we haven't, the communication has obviously been inconsistent with what's actually happening on the ground. So as a result of the increase in violence, we actually reallocated 3 additional teams to Deep East Oakland. That's the equivalent of over 20 officers reallocated to deal with violence in Deep East Oakland. We collapsed 2 squads within our northern part of the city, and then another squad from the middle East Oakland area so that we could bring additional resources to East Oakland, in particular to address the violent crime. We have redeployed a new structure and command staff to be more responsive to the shootings that we've seen out in East Oakland. So I think while people might seem to think that there's resources being reallocated to, say, Chinatown and other locations, we've actually restructured the department to bring more resources into Deep East Oakland. We collapsed 2 walking teams that was responsible for actually patrolling Chinatown, downtown, Jack London, and around the lake. But as a result of the spike in crime, I only reallocated 1 officer as a Chinatown liaison officer, and then 1 officer to the Fruitvale area as a liaison to the non-speaking English communities. And so while we have reallocated 2 officers to those 2 areas, we still have allocated additional 20 officers to Deep East Oakland to address violent crime.
Thank you for that, Chief, and addressing that. And thank you for asking how we're doing in my first 2 years. For those who are subscribed to my newsletter, we will be sending a sort of a 2-year review that we can actually give you more sort of substance around what we have been able to accomplish. And I am pleased that we have created significant momentum in the past 2 years for District 6, East Oakland, and Oakland as a whole. Chief Jackson, I think one of the questions, Chair Jackson, one of the questions was related to the balance in terms of the accountability with respect to the ability to actually deliver the reports that may pull away from other duties.
Certainly. So there's so much for us to tunnel through. We've been in a negotiated settlement agreement for 18 years, and the police commission has been in place for merely 3. One of the things I'd like to point out is that we previously had significant percentages of Oakland people being racially profiled. And when I say Oakland people, I mean Black and Black males primarily. What OPD has sufficiently done is to bring down those numbers. But the percentages are still almost the same. And so when we talk about requesting reports, one, we have to understand what the entire context is. So one of the points that was made here and in another meeting was body-worn cameras. That is an interesting scenario. I want to know, what is the problem, the continuous problem of officers not turning their body-worn cameras on? Does that mean that the discipline ought to be higher to start with because people are not taking it seriously enough? I'm not sure. And so what you end up doing is you learn from conversations like this and ear to the ground what vulnerabilities that citizens are still dealing with and what accountabilities that the police need to be tighter on. That is the commission's job. I know that people think, oh, we're supposed to be fighting all the crime. That is not our job, and we are trying to stay within our role and responsibility, and that is to create accountability for the police. It is also to support the chief and what it is that he thinks he needs to keep this city safe. Because accountability, it's not you get to be accountable and you don't. It's an entire police department. And 2 weeks in, we want to make sure that the chief has what he needs by way of support of Chief Cespedes, the city administrator, the mayor, and all of us on the ground. You know, my parents are in their 80s. They still live in the same house that I was raised in, not too far away from me. I'm worried about the crimes that are happening in their neighborhood, particularly being portrayed on elder people. But what I tell my parents first is, don't go out after dark. I hate, you know, that they feel like, you know, they need to stay in their house. But my deal is, don't make yourself a more easy victim. Let us be smart about changing the ways in which we do things, watching if people are following us home, and not letting people get in our personal space. Now, that's another big deal. But anyway, I you know, went off track in terms of the reports. We are trying to continuously do different things to see where the increase in challenges or gaps are. And as well, we want to highlight when things are going very well so that we make sure that what process, you know, took us there, we keep in place. I think that there was some significant crime that was being fought or prevented by OPD, and then the budget hit. Now, we all know that a $62 million overtime, you know, or excuse me, city budget, you know, overspell has to be managed. We have a fiduciary responsibility to do so. But then we go and we say, oh, they don't have what I used to have and what I'm used to. Well, how are you supposed to get it? This is how partnerships and increasing roles for non-sworn people will hopefully be helpful. Rounding up those 30-year-olds that Chief Cespedes talked about, you know, some are going to do well in ceasefire, others aren't. But when people make bad decisions, they have to be disciplined. They have to pay that price. We want to understand and give them an opportunity to turn it around for some who will take it.
Thank you, Chair Jackson. I'm going to ask another question that was asked, and I feel like I missed one question that Jose asked, but he got two in, and they were multi-part questions. So a message came through related to, and I think this is probably for Chief Armstrong. It says, and I guess you can validate, the city of Oakland has one officer for every 549 residents, yet we have had 15 homicides thus far. The city of San Jose, the 10th largest in America, city in America with a population of 1+ million, has one officer for every 930 residents, yet they've had only 5 homicides thus far. Why is there such a stark contrast between Oakland and San Jose?
I think, again, I mean, the reality for Oakland is that we are the smallest police department in the country for the size of our city. We're talking about a city that's nearly 435,000 people, and we currently have a little over 730 officers. Only 400 of those are actual police officers, so the number is more like 1 to every 10,000, right? And so we, you know, these are the challenges that we face in Oakland. Obviously, we know that we have our level of violent crime is much higher than San Jose. It's always been higher than San Jose. And so our challenges are much different. But you know, we also in Oakland support a lot more services to address crime than San Jose as well. And so I think it's just different approaches to how you address crime based on, you know, different cities' approach to crime. And so while, you know, it's not me saying that there's a need for us to, you know, reach the level of San Jose, but I do think, you know, we're a significantly smaller agency.
Thank you for that. I see John Jones, you're there.
Councilmember, a point of clarity about the DVP budget that the question was asked.
Please.
The DVP budget, the first year of the DVP budget under my direction was this year, and it's $7.2 million, not $30 million. So the DVP as a department was fully operational in July of this year. I did come on board in September of 2019, but the department was not just yet formed. But just to clear up the budget issue, it has never been $30 million. The most that the DVP has, Oakland Unite got from Measure Z was $9 million. And this past year, when I presented the spending plan to council, it was $7.2 million. It's still significant amounts of money. But just to clarify that it's not 30 million. And just to clarify that point.
Thank you for that, Chief. John Jones, and actually, given the fact that we are late, I'm going to go around to the panelists. I apologize to those who were not able to speak and get your question asked. I'm going to give each of the panelists, I'll say, a minute and a half to have any parting remarks, closing thoughts, starting with John Jones, and then we will close up for the evening. John.
Okay, thank you, council member. I'll be quick. First of all, I want to say I appreciate this conversation, everyone attending, because clearly what we're experiencing in our beautiful city is definitely more than worthy of warranting some real attention to it. I want to say something because somebody told me long ago that the key to marketing is repetition. So I'm gonna continue to really emphasize the cultural piece. And just real quickly from a historical standpoint, we have to always keep in mind that when the Black Panthers were formed in Oakland, that was met with intense resistance from the federal government. So when we talk about things like COINTELPRO, we can't forget the war on drugs. Oakland became ground zero for the cheap influx of drugs and guns. That was by design. And a counterculture was created. One, I say, that was birthed by revolution, but not politicized. So what we're seeing in the streets is an outgrowth of that. And then when you couple in the crack cocaine epidemic and really hip hop, I encourage anyone, listen to Oakland hip hop artists, what they rap about, what they talk about, because that became part of the national reputation for Oakland. I always say there's an age divide. Over a certain age, when you talk about Oakland, if you say the Black Panthers, no disrespect, you're over a certain age. These youngsters are not talking about that. They're talking about all the street stuff. If we're talking about the sex trafficking, keep in mind, the movie The Mac was filmed in Oakland. And even then, quick backstory, the producers, it was financed by Frank Ward, one of the most famous pimps out of Oakland. Oakland was ground zeros for the Players Club. People came to Oakland to show off their cars, giving birth to the sideshow. So it's important we understand those pieces. But the Black Panthers also was trying to extort these producers, so it created some conflict. So I want folks to be aware of that. Felix Mitchell was a Panther Cub, but when he grew to power in the 6'9" village, he muscled the Panthers out of there. The community school was just down the street, right where Men of Valor is located today. So that cultural piece is so important. It's important for us to understand that there's a segment of Oakland that exists parallel to the world that many of us live in, but it's no less real. It's no less influential. And this is what draw people into Oakland now, because that's a reputation. And the last thing I want to say is so important. When we talk about public safety, we have to be mindful of how we message it. In other words, and I'm gonna tell you right here directly from folks on the ground, if we frame it as we're getting rid of police officers, keep in mind the criminal element is not politicized. Folks in the streets didn't say, oh my God, police killed George Floyd, let me stop selling dope. It's a reality. We don't have to understand it. I always tell people that don't try to make sense of something that was not meant to make sense, but don't think that is no less real. I come from that world and I'm in proximity to that world. So I want to share that with you all, just as part of my experiences. We have to be mindful of how folks think in the streets. So thank you all.
Thank you, John. Next, I'm going to go to, let's say, Chief Cespedes. Any closing remarks, thoughts as we close out for the evening? Oh, you're on mute, Chief.
Closing remarks. Yes, I think we have just gone through probably one of the most difficult years that this city will have in terms of the combination of violence, COVID, intimate partner violence, an inability to dampen the violence. I feel very hopeful that the level of talent and the level of collaboration that has evolved in Oakland will be able to turn this situation around. And I'm very hopeful that while we cannot arrest our way out of this problem, we also cannot prevent our way out of this problem. So I welcome the partnership of the new chief of police that is born and bred in Oakland and has the respect on the streets of Oakland. And I look forward to to being part of turning this around on behalf of the city of Oakland. So it's an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to continued collaboration.
Thank you. Chair Jackson.
So what I want to say is that I think we're all exhausted. This pandemic has raged havoc, loss of family members, death, unemployment, just all the worst things that has created a bigger divide for those that have the least. I want to say that we have to band together. We have to recognize that Chief Armstrong or Chief Cespedes can't get it all done by themselves. We need to keep talking to each other and talking to our city council members. We need to get more money and boots on the ground in the places that will have the most impact. But again, listen to John Jones. He is speaking about a population that we don't pay attention to. He is giving us history and context that created this culture, this underbelly of a culture, some of it culturally responsive and part of showmanship. But the other part of it is that it can be deadly and very violent. We have to continue to listen to voices like his and identify those that are doing the crime and figure out how to get them to stand down by giving them something else that is positively distracting. The ways in which, LA used to get the Crips and the Bloods to lay down their guns for a particular purpose. Richmond has done it. We can do it. Let's just keep hope alive.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Chief Armstrong.
Well, I thank you, council member, for hosting tonight. I appreciate you having me be a part of this important conversation. I'll say that to what was spoken of by John Jones earlier. While we want to have the best solutions, the reality is that we are facing a crisis in our community. And these incidents that are occurring every night are not numbers. They are people. They are families. And so while we, sit in a room and have these discussions, those out in the streets that are facing shootings as we speak don't have the luxury of waiting for us to come up with a comprehensive solution. So I think this is about all of us getting boots on the ground, like Chair Jackson said, and doing the work. And that doesn't mean just law enforcement arresting people. It just means all of us coming together collectively to make Oakland a safer city. That's my commitment. That's what I believe we all should strive for, is for Oakland to be a safe city for everyone. I remember a day when I can play in front of my house and run down the street. There's a lot of families that don't feel that way anymore. And I think we all have a responsibility to the residents of Oakland to come together as leaders and come up with solutions that make Oakland safer. So that's my commitment. And again, thank you for having me tonight.
Thank you for that, Chief Armstrong. Keisha Henderson, our District 6 Reimagining Task Force member. Didn't want to leave you out before I closed out.
Thank you for having me, and I appreciate hearing all of the voices from the community, raising awareness to a lot of the things that I'm facing just in my own neighborhood. I just want to continue to say that we all, like everyone has said as the panelists, that we all do need to come together and work together to get the community back to where it needs to be, and not just think that it's just going to be the law enforcement that's going to be able to handle it. I think we all have what we need in order to, within ourselves, in order to kind of bring the community back together. So I appreciate this conversation. I would love to have more town hall meetings that is like this, because it's very important to hear community engagement from all of the districts. And I hope to have some of you all that raised awareness from the community in a lot of the rest of our task force meetings that we have left, because being a task force member, I mean, we haven't really had the diversity of community voices from the most impacted areas, or for those like you all that is on the call tonight to represent for those of us who have been impacted from Oakland. So I encourage you guys to definitely come out to our task force meetings, because your voices need to be heard and elevated. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Keisha. And thank you for your service on the task force. So I'm going to close out now. I want to just thank my panelists, the panelists for this evening. It truly is a partnership, and it is you stepping up to serve in your respective capacities, helping to lead us through these challenges that, yes, they are challenges, but I know that we are positioned well to overcome them. I want to thank those who joined the call and stuck with us this far, because many of you are working in your own right to support stronger communities, stronger neighborhoods coming together. I want to just sort of thank you, lift you up for that. That is what we need more of and to anchor to. I know there are a number of questions that were asked that we didn't get a chance to answer. There were hands that were raised. Don't hesitate to reach out to my office. Continue to see us as sort of a resource, not just for answers, but for making sure that you're plugged in and connected to various parts of the city and then also the community in terms of opportunities. Please subscribe to our newsletter. That's how we're continuing to get information out and share that with everyone in terms of opportunities to not just support these efforts, not just to show up at council meetings, when to show up and make your voice heard when it's most critical, but also different things that we're doing in the community to really change and create that those opportunities that we talked about. You guys see, I have to make a plug. You guys see behind me in the virtual background, the Acoma Market. I want to encourage everybody to come out first and third Sundays, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. to the Acoma Market right at the corner of Eastmont Mall, 73rd and Foothill. It is an amazing, it's amazing to see how we've transformed that vacant lot that was just weeds and litter and graffiti into something that's now an active gathering space for community, for local businesses, for local food vendors, accessing fresh, healthy foods. So I want to encourage those to come out and support as well. I have to thank my team, Pamela Farron, my chief of staff, Lena Hancock, who leads special events, and Rowena Brown, our constituent liaison, and then the newest addition, Kiana Gums, who is our comms communications director. You will see more communications coming out from us to even strengthen that. So have to lift them up because you can't do this on your own. It is something that it's a team, it's a collective effort. So wanted to just acknowledge them as well. Thank you everyone for an engaging conversation. We will be following up with an email and then summarizing some of the key takeaways and important links. We will also be posting this video and sharing that so that others can watch it as well. Thank you for your time and have a good night.